Okay, we're continuing with the best of the West, art, movie, and music. So we're on like something like lecture 43 or something, page 308. We're in early Christianity, I think part 3 of early Christianity. This is St. Augustine, taken to school by his mother Monica. She became a saint too. And she was a strong influence on him in his move towards Christianity. Here he is again with his mother Monica. Here's St. Augustine at the moment of his conversion, a famous conversion story. Okay, he sort of had a vision and heard a voice, tolla leggi, which means take up and read, take up and read. And it means he picked up the Bible and opened it, and he opened it right to Romans 13, chapter 13, verse 13, which said, let us walk properly in the day and not spend the nights in drunkenness and orgies. And he repented then and there and became a Christian. Before that, he was largely a Manichaean, and he was a big fan of Cicero, and he taught rhetoric. So he knew a lot about writing, very literate. Here's St. Augustine catching the truth of veritas, meaning truth in Latin, painting by Philip Champagne. Okay, here's another vision of Augustine down by the seaside by Benvenuto Tisi in 1520. So St. Augustine dreamed that he was by the seaside and he saw a boy scooping sand, making a hole in the sand. And he asked the boy, why are you doing that? And the boy said he wanted to put the sea into the hole. And St. Augustine said, that is impossible. And the boy said to him that I will sooner be able to do this than you will be able to understand all the mysteries of God with your limited understanding. So what's the point? That we benefit more from holistic study of epidemiology and comparative anatomy than we do from reductionist research, where we try to create a God out of making supplements. Okay, that was a vegan joke, but he just meant that you're not going to figure out everything that God did immediately. So, anyways, wrong is wrong. These are some Augustine quotes. Wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. The problem of a response to evil is not to return evil, but to transcend it. The key question is to what use can you put your suffering? How will you transcend it? And what I would also say is that, I don't like the people that bug me about dogma. I've read, thousands of Bible commentary pages, and there's a lot of minor controversies. They're never going to be resolved, and who cares? They really don't matter. What matters is the message of Christ. That doesn't vary, and it's pretty straightforward. So that's what people should care about. Okay, here's St. Cyril and Methodius, two saints that went and helped Christianize Eastern Europe. They developed the Slavic alphabet. This is the Cyrillic alphabet, you could call it, by Jan Matejko from 1885. Here's a painting of St. Thomas Aquinas. And what had happened was his family, his parents and his brothers, they didn't want him to become a priest. So they tried to tempt him with a prostitute. And he took a log from the fire and he chased her out, said, leave me alone. So Thomas Aquinas, the unifier of faith and reason. Okay, here's another Thomas Aquinas from the Fountain of Wisdom. He took Christianity of that time, and it was sort of on a Platonic path, like from Plato to Augustine, Plotinus and Dionysius, this pseudo-Areopagite, pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite. Anyways, he put it back on an Aristotelian track, that unified faith and reason that said, don't just worry about pie in the sky of the afterlife, let us study the things here on earth. And that got people a lot more interested in studying the things down here on earth, much more practical. And that paved the way, the scholastic school of learning for the Renaissance. They would just write down a question and then debate it. And they were very good at doing it, and these are the first universities in the history of mankind, the cathedral universities. Okay, here's another Thomas Aquinas, and again, I like all this stuff, the unifier of faith and reason, because there's a push in the modern world to say, you don't need religion to do science and to study, but the truth is you need it. You really need it a lot, because if you don't have Christian ethics, everything gets corrupted. Look at all the high-fat phonies lying for money. Look at all the bro signs lying for money. Look at all the paleo-keto carnivores lying for money. Look at all the drug companies lying for money. So where are you going to find somebody who's going to tell the truth? You're going to find it in somebody who has Christian ethics. They'll say, I will do what is right. even if there's no money in it. Like Augustine had said, wrong is wrong even if everybody's doing it, right is right even if nobody's doing it. And you have to have that. You have to, in the end, have that moral foundation, or otherwise everything is corrupt, and then it just goes downhill. And when everything's corrupt and there's no right or wrong and there is no God, then the ruler becomes the equivalent of God on earth, and they just tell everybody, do as I say or I'll kick your butt. And most of the time, sooner or later, you'll end up with a very bad, corrupt ruler, and they're just going to impose slavery and brutality and rule by force. There's no way around that. This is all well known, and it's obvious if you just, with minimal thinking, that's pretty obvious to reach that conclusion. Okay, and he wrote his big book, Summa Theologica. Okay, this is a painting of Augustine by Carlo Crivelli. Here's a vision of Augustine where he felt frustrated. Of St. Thomas Aquinas. He felt frustrated he hadn't done more. He had a vision of himself before Christ, and he's like, Christ, I tried. I just couldn't do more. And Christ said, oh, I'm pleased with you, Thomas. You did pretty good. You did the best you could. Okay, the vision by Santo de Tito. There's another painting of Thomas Aquinas, the apotheosis of Thomas Aquinas. Okay, and he developed the school of scholasticism, Thomism, showing that faith and reason go together, that religion and science go together. Aquinas unified faith and reason. Aquinas got Christians to focus on living life better here on earth. He showed that studying God's creations is pleasing to God, and this motivated Christians to study more and become great scientists and scholars and, classify the plants, study the animals, study all the other things down here on earth. Okay, so he really did a good service for the church. He organized the knowledge of the ancients like Aristotle and Plato, helped standardize the curriculum of the universities of his day, and again set the foundation for the Renaissance in Europe, which came out of Italy, especially with Florence and Rome, but earlier France had a big epicenter in Paris with the cathedral schools. Here's another saint here. This is Saint Catherine. And, the Catholic Church is really good to women. It loves women. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, refuting the philosophers of the Roman Emperor Maxentius. Okay, painting by Goswin van der Weyden. He's the grandson of Rogier van der Weyden. This was made in 1600. And she converted some of the emperor's philosophers to Christianity, including the wife of Maxentius. But he got pissed off, and she was martyred. Here is St. Catherine of Siena in Italy. She stayed in the city behind to help with the plague victims, painted by Baldassare Franceschini. But, that's pretty typical. The Christians are always doing good things and helping other people. And, a woman can, have a big family, or she can be a nun, she can be in a convent, whatever she wants. Here's St. Elizabeth of Hungary. She was the daughter of a king, and she was married with 3 kids, but she chose to serve the poor. People could be, lay members of the Franciscan order, for example. Okay, painting by Edmund Layton, beautiful painting. That's what I mean. Christianity has a place for everybody, and I can remember when I was growing up, I would see people who, somebody would have a problem. They could be, mentally retarded, or they could have some physical injury, and they would get a job with the church. The church would help them, and they would work, and they would be fine. They would do good. St. Margaret of Cortona, like when I played football, and our mascot was a guy with Down syndrome, and everybody liked him. Everybody was nice to him. St. Margaret of Cortona was mistress of a wealthy man initially. Later, she started a hospital, became a patron saint of the sick, the homeless, the falsely accused by Alessandro Calvi. So it's full of this sort of stuff. And like I'm saying, Christianity honors women big time. Look, it's got Mary. The Protestants don't even acknowledge Mary. Here is the rosary. Let me see what this painting is. St. Dominic, the Dominican order, with his vision of receiving the rosary from the Virgin by Bernardo Cavallino. Okay, St. Dominic promoted the rosary. This one is St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits. He decides to dedicate his life to Christ. Okay, God the Father and Jesus. And here is the apotheosis of St. Ignatius, painted by Andrea Pozzo. This is painted on a flat surface. It's incredible, the three-dimensionality of it, the perspective of it. This is sort of like, the ultimate painting of the Baroque era, 1690. It's just spectacular. Oh, here's a painting I show this. This is my mother, and my mother actually should have been a saint. The best person I ever met in my whole life was my mother. My mom was so good. Here's a story I'm going to tell you about her. One of her grandchildren was born very sick, in septic shock, had to be managed in the intensive care unit on ECMO, endocorporeal membranous oxygenation, like a heart-lung bypass machine, okay? And everybody thought the kid was going to die. I thought the kid was going to die. Everybody thought the kid was going to die. The kid had been in a code blue for 2 hours, multiple blood transfusions. So anyways, my mom, who was dying at that time, she had metastatic tumor in her lungs from her cancer, and she was coughing up blood pretty frequently every day. She moved into the ICU and had a cot next to the kid, and she would always hide when she's coughing up blood. She had a napkin because she didn't want them to kick her out. And she would just, keep talking to the baby to reduce its stress level. We all thought the kid was dead. But she would say, I am with you, you're going to be fine. She had a picture of Padre Pio in the room and a picture of St. Jude, and she'd pray to him. And she stayed with that kid until that kid went home. The kid did fine. He graduated from college, but that kid would have been dead. I don't care what medical stuff you did. Hours and hours of code blue, shit, transfused 20 units of blood, hypotensive, prolonged time, and you're expecting brain death. And the kid came out perfectly fine. He was an honor student in college. My mom saved his life. There's no way around that. Anyways, that was like a typical thing my mother did. She was on the board of directors at an orphanage. She adopted a bunch of kids. She was like the best person. This is St. Francis in Ecstasy by Giovanni Bellini. And she was like the most devout Christian you could imagine. My mom had a collection of all the saints, and I had these other Puerto Rican aunts. They know all the saints. They know all the stories. They're not Bible scholars. They never read, but they knew all this religious stuff. They go to church every Sunday, quite often on the weekdays. They're always doing nice stuff for people. Joan of Arc. Okay, that's where I noticed too. The Puerto Rican Christians were better than the Irish Christians, because the Irish Christians would try to be intellectual, but they didn't really have the intellectual gravitas to be that sophisticated. Whereas the Puerto Ricans were just living it. And man, Jesus was their best friend, and were they good? They did so many good things. My mom was always on the right side, regardless of the rules. Okay, here's St. Columba, the Irish monk. They saved civilization by making copies of all the Greek and Roman books and the Bible so that it would not get lost from mankind through the Middle Ages. There's a good book about that, Thomas Cahill, How the Irish Saved Civilization. Here's the schism of the religious groups not getting along. Here is St. Louis visiting the sick. Here is John of God saving the sick from a fire. And here's Cardinal John Henry Newman, painted by John Everett Millay from the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in 1896. And I'll just read you a few quotes from him. John Henry Newman. He wrote a hymn called Lead Kindly Light. God has created me to do him some definite service. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be a preacher of truth. Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step is enough for me. Yeah, and that's basically kind of how it works in Christianity. There's sort of a struggle between good and evil, and you say, well, I'll be on the side of good. I'll just do the best I can within my own personal situation, my own personal ability, my own personal resources, my own personal context. And if everybody did that, the world would be a much better place. It ripples outward to the people you encounter. I'll try to follow the teaching of Christ, to be nice, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to be helpful. That what you do to the least of my brethren, you're doing to me. That's a respect for individual rights. Man's created in the image of God, therefore he's part divine. If you do that, you're respecting individual rights, and you get away from all this modernist BS that's destroying the world. That's what it'll take to make the world a better place. And I wish it would happen, And then you say to yourself, well, it doesn't look good. It looks like everything's going down into the garbage can. You say, well, I'll just do the best I can while I'm alive, while I'm walking and breathing. I'll do the best I can and hope for the best. And what else are you going to do? All right, so next painting here is by Gustav Doré. It's called Christ Leading the People Out of the Valley of Tears. It's a beautiful painting from 1883. Here is The Triumph of Christianity Over Paganism by Gustave Doré. This one's from 1868. Here's The Sacred Heart of Jesus by Pompeo Bottoni from 1767. My mom had this painting on the wall in our house when I was growing up. And here's a couple of quotes. I think this is by Fyodor Dostoevsky. He said, "Does faith spring from miracles, or do miracles spring from faith?" Basically, if everybody has faith, then better things happen. No one has been able to create a higher ideal of man and virtue than the ideal given by Christ. Even those who renounce Christianity and criticize it, in their innermost being, they still try to follow the Christian ideal. If they drive God from earth, we shall shelter him underground. There is nothing more beautiful, more profound, more sympathetic, more reasonable, more courageous, and more perfect than Christ. And there not only isn't, but I tell myself with a jealous love, there cannot be. What is the use of Christ's words unless we set a good example? Okay, that's Fyodor Dostoevsky from Brothers Karamazov. So I hope you found that helpful.